A simple woman gave a soldier a ride in the rain. Then, she heard a knock that changed her life. It was pouring rain, the kind that soaked through denim and made headlights blur like tears. Grace Bennet didn't plan to stop. She didn't know his name, didn't ask what happened, just saw a man limping, hunched beneath the weight of a drenched pack, walking alone down a winding two-lane road outside Maple Hollow. Can you imagine passing someone like that, alone in a storm, and feeling something pull at your heart? That's what Grace felt, and it changed everything. She could have kept driving. Most would have. But something inside her wouldn't let go of the sight, a soldier's silhouette swallowed by stormlight. Her daughter's voice echoed in her memory, "Why do people walk alone, Mama?" And Grace heard her own heart answer, "Because sometimes, no one stops." That night, she did. She offered him tea, a blanket, a couch. She didn't ask for his story, just gave him a place to rest. By morning, he was gone, no note, no goodbye, just a folded towel and a Purple Heart medal left beside the sink. Weeks passed. Bills mounted. Foreclosure papers arrived. The world grew quiet and heavy again until there was a knock. What if one act of kindness could come back to rewrite your entire life? For Grace Bennet, it did, and you'll want to hear what happened next on Real Stories. The rain had been falling for hours, soaking the narrow back roads outside Maple Hollow in cold, silver sheets. Grace Bennet gripped the steering wheel of her old teal pickup, eyes squinting through the blurry windshield wipers as they struggled to keep up. It was nearly 8 p.m., and she should have been home already. Mia, her daughter, would be waiting with her favorite bear and a mug of warm milk, but the bakery van had broken down again. Grace stayed late to help her boss tarp it before the storm turned worse. She never complained, not when the heater wheezed in the trailer, not when the lights flickered, not even when the bills came in thicker than the paycheck. She didn't live for more. She lived for enough. And that night, enough looked like a warm blanket, a working truck, and a road that led home until she saw him, a figure walking slowly on the shoulder, head bowed, clothes clinging to his frame like a second skin. He limped badly, leaning toward one side with each step. His backpack sagged heavily behind him. Grace's breath caught as she passed. A part of her wanted to keep driving. That voice in her head, shaped by years of warnings, told her, "You don't pick up strangers in the dark, Grace. Especially not alone. Especially not now." But another voice, quieter, older, surfaced, her father's voice, spoken decades ago in the same kind of rain, "If nobody else stops, maybe it's 'cause you're supposed to." She eased her foot onto the brake. The man didn't look up. Maybe he didn't expect help. Maybe he thought she was stopping for herself, but when she lowered her window and leaned over the bench seat, her voice barely louder than the rain, he finally turned. "Hey," she called gently, "you all right out here?" He paused. The hood of his jacket fell back slightly, revealing a face shadowed by fatigue and rain and a scar long, jagged, running from his temple down his jawline like something burned into him by fire, not time. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, voice low, rough, but controlled. "I didn't say you were," Grace replied. They held eye contact for a moment, stranger and stranger, two lives caught in the downpour. Then she reached over and pushed the door open. "I'm heading past the old base road. I can drop you off at the gate." He hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Thanks." As he climbed in, the truck filled with the smell of wet canvas and something metallic. He winced slightly as he sat, favoring his right side. His jacket was torn in places, stained. Grace noticed the old army insignia on his sleeve, half faded. "You in the service?" she asked gently, turning back onto the slick road. "Was. Just discharged." She glanced at him. "Honorable?" A flicker of a smile crossed his lips. "Is there any other kind?" They drove in silence after that, no music, no idle chatter, just the steady rhythm of rain hitting the roof and the gentle hum of a heater doing its best. She caught more details at each red light. His hair was cropped tight, military style. The scar trailed past his collarbone, disappearing beneath his shirt. He looked young and old all at once. "You from around here?" she asked. "No, just passing through, trying to get to Wilton." "That's over 20 miles, she said, surprised. "On foot?" He shrugged. didn't have many options. She clenched the steering wheel tighter, the ache of his words settling in her chest. What about the VA? He let out a humorless laugh. They helped me out the door. Ahead, the rusted sign for the old military turnoff came into view. She slowed the truck, eyes scanning the dark. I can let you off here, but he didn't move. I don't have ID, he said quietly. Lost my wallet when I got discharged. They said my docs would come in the mail. You mean they let you out with no ID? No transport? I didn't say it was a good system. She pulled to the side, then paused. Her fingers hovered above the steering wheel. The words came before she had time to second-guess them. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? He met her eyes, the same guarded look she'd seen in customers who didn't know how to ask for help. I'll find somewhere. That's not what I asked. 10 minutes later, he was sitting at her kitchen table, dripping onto a folded towel. She handed him tea, showed him where the coffee would be in the morning. Her daughter Mia peeked from the hallway once, clutching her bear, but Grace gently sent her back to bed. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. But something in that scarred soldier's silence told her, this man has carried more than any stranger should ever have to. And tonight, she had room on her couch. That was all he needed and all she had to give. The next morning, he was gone, no creaking floorboards, no door closing, just the faint smell of coffee she hadn't brewed, the folded towel left precisely where he'd sat, and something that made her freeze mid-step in the kitchen. Something small and heavy beside the sink. A purple heart. It was worn, the ribbon slightly frayed at the edge, but unmistakable. Grace stared at it for a long time, one hand resting on the counter, the other pressed against her chest like she needed to steady her own heartbeat. She didn't pick it up, not right away. It felt too sacred for hands that had done nothing to earn it. Eventually, she wrapped it in a dishcloth and placed it gently inside the drawer next to a few stray keys, a rubber band ball, and Mia's old drawing of their trailer taped to a rainbow. She told no one, not Nora, her best friend, who'd definitely have said something like, "You let a stranger sleep on your couch?" Not her mother, who would have asked too many questions, none of them kind. And not even Mia, who just assumed Logan was one of the tired angels she believed wandered the world. Because Grace didn't know how to explain it. It wasn't logic. It wasn't charity. It was something else, like she had been waiting for something without knowing what. And the night she saw Logan in the rain, it found her first. 12 days passed. The towel was still folded neatly. The Purple Heart now shared a drawer with late bills and expired coupons. The couch was empty again, except for the space where the quiet used to be. And then came the letter, tucked awkwardly in her mailbox, half damp from the morning drizzle. No return address, no stamp, just her name on the front. Inside, a single sentence scrolled in blocky handwriting, "You reminded me I still mattered. I'll find a way to repay that. L.W." That was it, no signature beyond the initials, no explanation, just those few words, direct, uneven, almost like they'd been written in a hurry. She stood by the kitchen sink, reading the sentence again and again until it blurred. Then she folded the letter and slid it into the same drawer as the medal. She closed it softly, like laying a flower at a grave. But while Logan had disappeared, real life hadn't, and real life was not kind. The foreclosure notice came 4 days later, a thick envelope from Maple Hollow Credit Union with her name printed in bold, impersonal font. She didn't have to open it. She already knew what it said, 30 days. That's how long she had before the home her father built, warped floors, patched roof, the garden she and Mia had dug with plastic shovels, would be listed, auctioned, lost. She tried, worked double shifts at the bakery, sold the last of her mother's jewelry, took in odd orders for birthday cakes she decorated at midnight while Mia slept, even cancelled the internet twice before realizing Mia needed it for school. But no matter how much Grace gave, kindness didn't pay mortgages. At work, she still smiled, poured coffee for the same regulars, packed takeout pies into cracked phone boxes, wiped down booths long after closing. And no one noticed, because Grace Bennett had always been the same, the reliable one, the strong one, the one who didn't ask for help. But there, alone in her small kitchen with a letter in the drawer and 30 days on the clock, she wasn't strong. She wasn't brave. She was scared. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe giving kindness away without expectation also meant no one would think to return it, until Nora noticed. It was a Tuesday. Grace had wiped down the same counter 3 times in 10 minutes. Nora finally put down her mop and crossed her arms. "Okay," she said, "what's going on?" Grace blinked. "Nothing. You forgot my snack day. You gave Officer Jim his coffee without cinnamon. You haven't even teased me about my bad date from last week." Spill. Grace hesitated, then she did, not everything, but enough about Logan, the night, the medal, the letter, the house, the slow, gnawing countdown. And Nora didn't gasp, didn't judge. She just leaned on the counter and said, "Well, that sucks." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in weeks. Grace laughed, a small, exhausted sound, but it was real. "Yeah," she whispered, "it really does." The next morning, after dropping Mia off at school, Grace took the long way home. Her truck rumbled past familiar sights, the rusted grain silo, the gas station with the flickering sign, the old VFW hall near the edge of town. A hand-painted banner hung from the railing, "Veteran Support Breakfast, this Saturday, all welcome." She almost drove past. She had nothing to give, nothing left to spare. But then she thought of Logan's scarred hands wrapped around the mug of tea, the soaked towel still folded on the couch, the letter in her drawer. Grace eased her foot off the gas. Saturday came, gray and chilly. Grace rose early and baked, not because she had to, she barely had enough flour, but because it was the one thing she could still do well. She wrapped her honey-oat loaves in cloth and placed them in an old basket. The VFW hall was modest, just folding tables, dented chairs, and the smell of burnt coffee. A few veterans in worn denim and faded caps lingered near the back. Grace didn't know anyone, but she stayed, set the bread on the table, poured coffee, smiled when someone met her eye. She didn't talk much, just moved quietly from table to table, wiping crumbs, refilling mugs. She didn't expect to be noticed, but someone did. Near the back sat a man in his early 30s, lean, sharp-eyed, posture military clean. As Grace reached to collect his plate, he looked up. "You're Grace Bennett, right?" She froze. "Yes." He stood, wiping his hands on a napkin. "I think you know someone I served with." Grace's heart skipped. "Logan." The man nodded, then reached into his jacket. He unfolded a photo, 6 men in desert fatigues, clustered in front of a rusted vehicle. One of them, half his face bandaged, grinning despite the crutch under his arm, was Logan. "He sent this a few weeks ago," the man said. "He met someone in Pennsylvania. Said she reminded him of who he used to be." Grace stared at the photo. Logan looked so different, smiling, surrounded. "I didn't know he had anyone left," she said softly. The man shrugged. "Logan doesn't talk much. Not since the fire. But when he does, he means it." He handed her the photo. "Thank you for seeing him. Not many do." That night, Grace pinned the photo above her kitchen sink. It wasn't framed. It didn't need to be. It just belonged. She looked at it every time she washed dishes. And something shifted inside her, a sense that her quiet life, her invisible, tired, ordinary life had somehow brushed against something much bigger. 3 weeks passed, and then came the call from Maple Hollow Credit Union. Grace had tried everything, delayed payments, calls to the manager, even begged for a restructure. But the voice on the other end, though polite, was firm. "Unless something changes dramatically, Ms. Bennett, there's not much more we can do." Grace hung up and sat at the table, head in her hands. Mia played quietly in the next room, unaware that her unicorn-covered bedroom might vanish in 30 days. That night, after dinner, Grace stood by the window, watching the porch light flicker in the drizzle. The Purple Heart still lay in the drawer. The letter, the photo. She didn't know what she was waiting for, a miracle, a restart. What she got was a knock. It came at 7:03 p.m. Grace wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door. And there he was, Logan Wells, standing on her porch, upright, dressed in full military uniform, clean-shaven, steady. Behind him, 2 black SUVs idled quietly. Flanking him were two other men, one wearing Master Sergeant stripes, the other a captain's insignia. "Evening, Grace," Logan said, his voice softer, clearer than she remembered. Her throat closed. "Logan." He nodded once, then held out an envelope. It wasn't thick, but it felt heavy. "This is long overdue," he said, "but it's only the beginning." Grace didn't move at first. She stood in the doorway, one hand still clutching the dish towel, eyes flicking between the envelope and Logan's hand and the two uniformed men flanking him. The porch light glowed warm over Logan's scarred face, casting long shadows onto the step. There was no rain this time, no limp, no hoodie soaked to the bone. Just presence, purpose. "What is this?" she whispered. Logan stepped forward carefully, no longer hunched by pain. "It's everything you never asked for, but everything you deserve." Then he turned slightly. "Captain," the taller of the two men extended his hand. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Captain Stephen Marks, United States Army. We're here on behalf of the Office of Veteran Community Engagement and the 5th Special Recon Unit." Grace blinked. I don't understand." "We'd like to come in," the captain said gently, "if now's a good time." Behind her, Mia peeked around the hallway corner, barefoot, hugging her stuffed bear. Grace turned quickly. "Sweetheart, it's okay. Just some visitors." Captain Marks smiled and crouched down. "Hi there. I'm Stephen. Are you Mia?" Mia nodded, uncertain. "We're real soldiers," Logan said softly, dropping to one knee beside her. "But we're not here on a mission. We're here to thank your mom." "Why?" Mia asked quietly. Logan looked up at Grace. "Because when no one else did, she saw someone worth saving." They sat around the small kitchen table, Grace, Logan, the captain, the master sergeant, whose name was Alvarez. Mia, after some coaxing and a promise of dessert later, returned to her room. The envelope lay unopened in front of Grace. Logan spoke first. "The night you picked me up, I was in a bad place," he began, hands folded tightly in his lap. "Worse than I let on. I'd just been discharged from a rehab unit in Harrisburg, not because I was ready, because they were full. Budget cuts." Grace's mouth parted, but she said nothing. "I lost my wallet in the fire. Had no ID, no money, no place to stay. I was walking to Wilton because an old buddy used to live there. I didn't even know if he still did." He hesitated. "There was a bottle in my bag, my last one, unopened. I'd planned to find a quiet spot and disappear." Grace's eyes welled. "Logan, but then you stopped," he said, his voice catching. "You didn't ask me what I'd done. You didn't flinch at the scars. You didn't treat me like a stray dog or a liability. You gave me tea. A towel. Silence. You treated me like a human being." He turned to Captain Marks. "I wrote my unit that night, told them something happened I couldn't explain, something I hadn't felt since before deployment." Captain Marks opened a black folder and slid a document across the table. Grace stared. Her name, Grace Bennett, was printed in elegant script at the top beneath the seal of the U.S. Army. Certificate of Community Honor for her exceptional compassion, courage, and quiet service to a wounded veteran. Ms. Grace Bennett is hereby recognized as an honorary civilian contributor to veteran resilience and recovery initiatives with all corresponding privileges and acknowledgments. Grace blinked hard. "That's the Secretary of the Army." "Yes, ma'am," Captain Marks said. Master Sergeant Alvarez then placed a second document beside the first, simpler, plainer, but far more powerful. "This one," he said, Logan insisted on. Grace read the first line and felt the air leave her lungs. "This letter confirms full acquisition and forgiveness of mortgage debt associated with the property at 178 Orchard Lane, Maple Hollow, Pennsylvania. Her home, her father's home. Saved." Her eyes filled. Her voice cracked. "Why would you do this?" Logan met her gaze. "Because what you did wasn't just for me. You reminded me, and the people I serve with, that quiet kindness still exists, and that it matters." Grace pressed her hands to her face, shoulders trembling. They didn't stay long, just enough to answer her questions, enough to promise follow-up support. Before they left, Logan reached into his uniform pocket and placed a small velvet box in her hand. She opened it. Inside was a heavy silver coin, engraved with a military emblem on one side. On the other, a single line, "She didn't ask. She just acted." "It's a challenge coin," Logan explained. "Usually for valor in combat, but sometimes we give them to civilians when they remind us why we serve." Grace held it close, unable to speak. That night, after Mia went to bed, she sat by the window, fingers running over the smooth edges of the coin. The certificate hung quietly above the mantel. The letter lay folded beside the sink, and in the drawer beneath it all, the Purple Heart still rested. The home was safe now, but what she'd given that night on the road wasn't charity. It was dignity, and it had come back multiplied. For a while, everything felt still. Grace moved through her days with a quiet calm, like someone walking through freshly fallen snow, carefully, reverently, not wanting to disturb the peace that had finally arrived. The house was safe, the debt gone. She slept a full night for the first time in months. But peace has a way of being temporary, especially in places where old paperwork gathers dust in dark corners. It started with a voicemail. "Hey, Grace, this is Greg from County Services. Sorry to bother you, but something's come up with your property records. You might want to swing by when you get a chance." She felt it immediately, the twisting knot in her gut, the one she hadn't missed. The office was dim, full of filing cabinets and the scent of stale coffee. Greg, the same clerk who'd handled her tax filings for years, looked sheepish as he rifled through a manila folder. "I know the Army paperwork cleared your mortgage," he said, "but when we scanned the deed again, something came up." Grace leaned in. "There's an old lien attached to the land," Greg continued, "dated back more than 20 years. Looks like your father took out a private loan after your mother passed. It was never formally discharged. The debt got sold to some third-party agency, and now they filed a claim." Her voice barely found its way out. "What does that mean?" He winced. "Technically, they now own the acreage behind your home, everything past the main structure, the garden, the shed, the coop, anything not directly tied to the original mortgage." Grace felt the air disappear from the room. "But that's our backyard," she said, stunned. "That's where Mia planted her first sunflower. That's where she stopped herself." "I know," Greg said gently. "But they filed legally. If we don't contest it fast, they could fence it off, even sell it. And I looked into the agency, they've done this before. Of course they had a faceless corporation digging up old debts, preying on vulnerable families, hoping no one would have the strength or knowledge to fight back." Grace left the building in silence. She sat in her truck for nearly 10 minutes, unmoving, hands locked on the steering wheel. Then she pulled out her phone. The message she typed was simple. "Hi Logan, I know you've already done more than I could ever ask, but something's come up." She hit send and whispered into the empty truck, "Please let kindness keep going." Logan didn't ask for details. He just called the next morning. He listened carefully, quietly, the same way he had that first night in the rain. Then, after a pause, he said, "I'll take care of it." 3 days later, a man in a charcoal suit walked into the county records office. He carried a leather briefcase, a federal ID, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who wasn't used to being told no. He didn't threaten, didn't argue. He simply handed Greg a packet of documents stamped with a federal seal and signed by a judge from the Eastern District. The lien was invalid. The loan had been reactivated through fraudulent means. The agency behind it, a shell company, was currently under federal investigation. It was over, this time for real. When Grace got the call, she didn't answer right away. She just stared at the screen. Then she climbed into her truck, drove to the edge of town, and sat at the top of the old hill where her father once taught her how to roll-start a stalled engine. She cried there, quietly, messily. No one was watching, and that was the point. Later that evening, she called Logan. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said, voice shaking. "You already did," he replied. "You just don't know it yet." The next day, she found another envelope in the mailbox, no stamp, no return address. Inside, What you grow in quiet places will one day feed someone you'll never meet. And beneath it, a single word written in slanted script, Semper Latin, she would later learn, for always. Grace folded the note and placed it beside the Purple Heart, the coin, and Logan's original letter. A small wooden box now held them all, kept not as trophies, but as reminders. That weekend, she stood barefoot in her backyard, the late spring sun warming the soil. It was hers now, all of it. The roots she once feared would be ripped away had grown deeper, stronger, steadier. Because in the end, the knock on her door hadn't just brought help. It had brought justice. And no corporation, no false debt, no buried paper trail could take that away from her again. Spring came quietly to Maple Hollow. Lilacs bloomed again at the edge of Grace's yard, their scent drifting through the open kitchen windows as bees hovered over the vegetable beds she thought she'd never see again. The coop behind the shed clucked with new life, and every morning, Mia ran barefoot through dew-covered grass to check for eggs. The land was truly hers now, not just the house, but the earth beneath it, the trees her father once planted, the garden she'd saved with every late-night worry and whispered prayer. But something deeper had shifted, too. Grace moved through the world differently now, not louder, not prouder, but steadier. She no longer avoided eye contact at the grocery store. She looked people in the eye and smiled, not because of the recognition, but because she had survived. And because, somewhere in the back of her mind, she kept hearing Logan's words, "What you did reminded us why we serve." Grace hadn't asked to be seen, but now people did. The first real change came in a letter from the Veteran Resilience Network of Eastern Pennsylvania. It arrived in a plain white envelope with a formal seal and a handwritten postscript at the bottom from Logan, "Just show up. That's all you've ever needed to do." The letter asked if she would consider serving as a community advisor, not because she had military experience, not because she had a degree, but because she had lived it. Quiet, compassion, grounded strength, compassion, the kind of perspective that couldn't be taught. At first, Grace hesitated. She wasn't a speaker, didn't know the right terminology, wasn't an expert witness in trauma or policy or systems trauma. But then she remembered Logan, soaking wet clothing and remembering, sitting in her truck that night with a pain he didn't know how to show, and how all she did was not look away. Maybe that's enough was enough. She said yes to real stories. The first few meetings were held in a converted shipping container outside of Wilton, Pennsylvania. A crooked hand-painted sign read, "Support Circle, Veterans and Civilians Welcome." Inside were mismatched chairs, a coffee pot that brewed more rust than roast, and a silence that felt heavy at first. But Grace sat with it, listened, spoke when she had something real to say, told stories about her dad, a Vietnam vet who flinched every 4th of July, about raising Mia with just enough to get by, about what it meant to open your door to someone when you barely had anything to give. And slowly, word spread. Veterans who had never shown up before began to trickle in, some out of curiosity, some because they'd heard about her, not from her, but from each other. One afternoon in late April, an older man named Harvey sat beside her in the parking lot after a session. His knuckles were swollen, skin sun-damaged and tight. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and said, "You know, I used to think civvies didn't get it." Grace glanced at him. "Some probably don't." Harvey nodded. "But you didn't need to get it. You just showed up." He flicked the ash. "We need more people like that." She didn't reply, just sat there with him, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Back in Maple Hollow, life didn't turn dramatic. It turned deeper. Nora still dropped by every Friday night with a bottle of wine and jokes about our town's quietest celebrity. But now, sometimes, the jokes came with real stories about people who'd been helped because of what Grace started. Veterans came by the bakery, strangers from nearby towns. One woman, tearful, hugged Grace and whispered, "You reminded my son he still mattered," then left before she could ask her name. At the farmer's market, Grace set out a hand-carved wooden sign, "Free produce for any veteran. No questions, no limits." And below it, in smaller letters, "If you've served, let the earth serve you now." Some took potatoes, some took nothing. One young man just stood at the edge of the stall for 15 minutes, then whispered, "Thank you," and walked away empty-handed, but he didn't leave empty. Logan visited only a few times, but when he did, he never came alone, always with someone new, a quiet man who rebuilt the fence, a wiry woman who rewired the coop, another who fixed the loose latch on her front gate like it was part of national defense. They stayed just long enough to help, then left, no fanfare, no debt. One of them, Reggie, returned a week after the lien was cleared and, without asking, installed solar panels on her roof. "I didn't ask for these," Grace said, watching him from the porch. Reggie just nodded once. Logan said sunlight helps things grow. Grace stood on her porch one golden evening, arms folded, as she watched Mia run through the yard laughing, barefoot, joy unburdened. This was what it meant to keep something, to earn it not through might, not through speech, but through quiet resilience. And now she had a new purpose, to keep showing up, to be the woman who didn't look away, so that others could begin to see themselves again. Winter came early that year. One evening, as Grace locked up the bakery, a car pulled slowly into the gravel lot. She thought it might be a lost traveler, but when the door opened, a young man stepped out, barely 20, face pale, with a kind of tightness around the eyes she recognized too well. He approached slowly, hesitating with every step. "Are you," he paused, swallowed, "the woman who helped Logan Wells?" Grace blinked. "I was one of them." The young man nodded, reached into his coat, and pulled out an envelope. "I'm his cousin. We hadn't talked in years, but he sent this to our family. Asked me to bring this to you." She took it carefully. "Thank you," she said. He didn't stay, just turned, climbed back into the car, and drove off into the frost-tipped dusk. Back home, Grace sat by the window and opened the envelope under the soft glow of her reading lamp. The handwriting was unmistakable, blocky, slanted slightly to the right. "Grace, I always believed the battlefield defined us, that only in war do we learn who we are, but I was wrong. Kindness does the same thing. It reveals us, sharpens us, softens the places war left ragged. You didn't just give me a ride. You gave me permission to live again. And through that, you gave something to everyone I've touched since the road you opened in me. I'll never stop walking. Thank you for seeing me when I was disappearing. Semper, Logan." Grace folded the letter with shaking hands, rose quietly, and walked to the fireplace. She opened the small wooden box where it all began, the purple heart, the challenge coin, the note about quiet places and unseen growth. And now, Logan's final letter. She placed it on top, closed the lid gently, not a shrine, a promise. In the spring, she added a new sign to the edge of the garden, painted by hand, faded slightly by dew. It read, "Free produce for any veteran. No questions, no limits." And just beneath, smaller, "What you grow in quiet places will one day feed someone you'll never meet." And they came, not for the tomatoes, not always for the food, but for the look in her eyes that said, "I see you." For the warmth of being remembered without having to explain. On her birthday, a package arrived, no return address, no note. Inside was a framed photograph, Logan, standing at a podium in Washington, hand over his heart, behind him, projected onto a massive screen. She didn't ask, she just acted. And beneath it, her name, Grace Bennett. She hung it beside the pantry, right where she packed meals every night. Because some things don't need to be honored in marble. They live in the hands that keep giving. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that kindness is never wasted, even when no one's watching, then share it. Let it echo. Let it land in someone's heart the way Grace's did for Logan. And if you've ever wondered whether your quiet act of compassion mattered, this story is your answer on Real Stories. Subscribe to Real Stories, where kindness is remembered, where justice is honored, where no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.